Gary O'Neill has been sacked. Welcome back to more James Allcott. We're going to talk about Gary O'Neill. We're going to talk about a couple of theories I've got, and we're going to highlight the problems that have led to his sacking, aside from the results. Let's start off with a bit of a theory of mine. Now, Wolves fans, tell me how you're feeling about this. Well, first off, straight off the bat, absolutely had to go. Had to go. Especially when he's saying some of the things that he said. And I do think, and when we get to Gary O'Neill in more depth, as in the man, I think he will have some huge regrets here in terms of the way that he's spoken, but I do think he will learn from it. And I think it's highlighted how kind of green he was and how tough the Premier League is, how exhausting the Premier League is. But my first thought is, when it comes to Wolves and the squad that we thought was probably good enough, I think what we've learned here is that, first of all, fixtures matter. And I'll get to the fixtures because I do think it plays a huge part. Second thing is the floor of your squad is as important, if not more important, than the ceiling of your squad. I think that's something that I'm realising in this kind of scenario. Now, you might be able to get away with it because you might be able to lean on certain players that might be able to get you out of trouble. But if things go wrong, you have a couple of injuries, you don't have those players available, or you get a horrible run of fixtures, if your floor drops and you lose have a couple of injuries, and your floor's not strong enough, that's going to lead to problems. And I think that's what we're seeing right now, alongside woeful confidence. Now, the 4 wins in 26, after the high watermark, let's call it, that he hit, is it's over 2 seasons. So it does bleed one to the other. And I get it as a stat, and it's fair enough, and it's not good enough, and he had to go. What I said at the start of the season was that these fixtures were going to really, really matter, these opening fixtures. And I do feel like, let me know if you agree with this one, guys. Do you feel like a fixture list can dictate your season? Because what I feel like I've learned here is that this fixture list that Wolves started off with is obviously not the only factor, but it is a factor within all of it, in the sense of the confidence drop of this Wolves side, the inability to just keep it together, because we've seen that at the end of games as well. And I think if you don't have this run of games at the start of the season, the depths of confidence and also the pressure aren't as high going into these other games, because you might have sort of had the reprieve, the respite, the relief of a couple of easier games. They kicked off the season with Arsenal, Chelsea, and we know how good Chelsea are now, Newcastle, who I know have been up and down but are a good side, Forest, who have an incredible season, Villa, who we know are really strong, Liverpool, who are top of the table, Brentford. Now, this is a moment where it feels like that's where they sort of lost their way, and some people were saying he should have gone then. Didn't happen. But that's a really tough set of fixtures. And Brentford also have always been really, really strong at home. So but that is and then Man City, and then Brighton as well. Now, Brighton, again, have been up and down since then, but in those early games, Brighton were playing very, very well. Now, look, ifs, buts, and maybes, I get it. But what I would say is that once you've had that certain run of games, and you're struggling, and you haven't won a game yet, then this next set of fixtures become really incredibly important. And it looked like they kind of started to get themselves out of the weeds of what they were in terms of getting a cheeky victory against Southampton, solid draws against Brighton and Palace, and a great victory at Fulham. But then it's kind of gone woeful again. And you're not kind of out of the woods quick. Weeds or woods? It's woods, isn't it? You're not out of the woods quick enough. And then this next set of games, especially after the big defeat against Bournemouth, and I think Bournemouth are going to pile a lot of pressure on a lot of teams, because people think that because they're little old Bournemouth, you can't lose to them. Bournemouth can slap up anyone. But after that pressure on that Everton game, and an Everton team that's struggling, a West Ham team that's struggling, and an Ipswich team that's struggling, it's not good enough. But the pressure was on. So I do feel like that fixture list has really, really hurt him. So that's my kind of first theory here. Second thing, in terms of the number one thing that's absolutely destroyed them, it's this. It's the fact that when it comes to set pieces, they've conceded 11 goals from an XG of 5.28. That is an abomination. That gets you relegated. So much talk about set pieces right now. We're kind of having a go at Arsenal for being good at them. You got a choice. Either be good at them or don't be. But that, defending's an attitude. And so it then leans on to Gary O'Neill, but it also leans on to the owners here. The owners have a part to play in this, in the fact that you lose someone like Max Kilman. Again, the floor of the centre-backs here is just not really high enough, and it's hurting them. It's hurting them massively, massively. And it's led to them, obviously, having to get rid of Gary O'Neill. The final thing with Gary O'Neill I wanted to talk about was sort of him as a manager. Because if you think, you still kind of feel like he's kind of so young as a manager in terms of what he's done so far. And what I am intrigued by is the sort of psychology of someone like Gary O'Neill because he's one he feels like someone who's happy to be vulnerable, happy to be emotionally intelligent, trying to be effusive. But what we see is that managers get beat down. They really, really do. And I just wonder, when you're a team that's going to go through a bad run, because this is the reason why I felt like he needed to go, is that, so for me, with Martí Cifuentes, my manager at QPR, I felt like he had some answers, Marty. I felt like he could find the answers. And I felt like with Gary O'Neill, it felt like he was sort of scrabbling around a little bit. Now, is that the state of play because of the squad not being good enough and the inability to kind of keep yourself in a game? Like the amount of times you're killing yourself with bad set piece goals being conceded, that is a huge thing. But you did feel, as the pressure was building, the inevitability was building, the defeat to West Ham but still surviving going into that Ipswich game, you then saw him speak. And I just wonder, with someone as open and as lovely as Gary O'Neill, can you really survive as a manager here? Because at some point, I think you need to be able to kind of, not detach, but there needs to be a fear factor in place here. And I felt like maybe the group was kind of trying for him, but I think sometimes there needs to be that little bit more fear. And there should have been, really. For a manager that's been given a 4-year deal in the summer, there didn't seem to be that fear. And I think that was because Gary O'Neill was kind of having to deal with the hand that he was being given by not being able to reinvest in that squad, especially when you lose those two players and not spend that money. It's cruel. It's cruel for a manager. And so, the final thing, I think it's a bit of a life lesson here in terms of his development as a manager, because some of the comments that he's made are, I'm going to say immature, but I don't mean immature, because it's something that I think we all want to do, where when you can see that you're being hard done by you're being let down, and he has been let down by that group, let's be honest, because he did do a solid job. You know, look, it's both of them, isn't it? And ultimately, there's only one person who can go. It's the coach. That's how you can kind of resolve this and get the sort of bump in freshness, fresh environment, new idea, new possibilities of going on and trying to stay in the league. And so that's another reason, like, when you don't feel like he can find any more answers, both in the way that he's speaking to the press, and that's such a huge part of this, but on the pitch as well, you're then going to be scrabbling about. And then you've got to kind of hit the reset button in any way that you can. And what's going to be interesting is if David Moyes has said no to Wolves, that's a huge loss, because there's a sort of correction theory with managers a lot of the time. And this idea that, I mean, do you go back to a Portuguese manager? Pereira is the one looks like he's going to be the person that's going to come through. That's what David Ornstein's saying. But that overcorrection, I mean, maybe it's just going back to your kind of roots, I guess, in terms of that Portuguese identity that Wolves have right now. So maybe moving away from it with Gary O'Neill was overall, at the end of it all, a mistake. But I don't think him as manager of Wolves has been a mistake. I think he's actually done very, very well. But those comments, turning on the team and the squad, that showed an element of not being able to kind of swallow what was going on anymore, because he knew what was coming. And I think in time, he will regret that. Not because he's not right in what he's saying, but because no good comes from it. And I think I've been thinking about this. Sometimes in life, you have to you just got to swallow it, because what's the point? Although you might get a bit of gratification in that moment by letting it out, by doing it in a way, in an environment where it's not going to work out for you, you actually kind of do yourself a disservice. And now Gary O'Neill's reputation has lost just that tiny bit of integrity, which is completely unfair and cruel, because he is a man of integrity. I see him as a future QPR manager, because our manager's not going to be there forever. I think the Championship is where he needs to go and kind of learn and manage lots and lots of games. Look, he's been in the game a long, long time, but he is still a young manager. But I think the situation has now just become a little bit too much for him. And it was the right decision for him to go. Let me know how you're feeling about this, guys. And make sure you check out, subscribe to this channel. We're nearly at 10k. That would be lovely if you'd like to subscribe. And also, this is the place where I'm going to be having those casual conversations with you like I've just done. So if you enjoy this, then make sure you keep getting involved. Oh, and go check out the Man United reaction that we've done on my main channel. Right, I'm going to shut up now. Bye.